Guys, this is Cricket Barrientos, founder, Sounds of Autism, and today we're here with Spectrum Talk. And Spectrum Talk is hosted by our health and wellness expert, nurse practitioner, Denise Hernandez. And Denise is with MBH Wellness Clinic, Mind Body Health. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the diagnosis of kids or adults who are showing signs of autism. We're going to show about the signs, and we're going to talk about the signs, and we're going to show a little bit about why autism may present itself at different times in people's lives and what to look for. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Denise Hernandez, nurse practitioner and health and wellness expert for MBH Wellness Clinic. Denise?
Hello. So I'm Denise Hernandez. I'm a family nurse practitioner. I've also finished my curriculum for psych mental health. So hopefully soon I'll be officially board certified in psych and mental health as well. My background, I've been a nurse for over 20 years now. I went to the University of Virginia for my undergraduate degree and then got my master's in nurse practitioner here in Arizona about 7 years ago. And so I have a varied background as far as areas I've worked in, but then a few years ago decided to open my own wellness clinic to really kind of treat people from the whole body. And as we've gone through, been doing more and more with mental health and finding it's very rewarding and a huge need. And so little by little, gotten more involved with kids, teenagers, and in treating them. And a lot of them end up with ADHD or autism that maybe hasn't been diagnosed or has been diagnosed, but struggling with some of the things that go along with that, like anxiety and depression, and being able to help treat and manage that as they get older. So here's where I find myself.
Denise, one of the things that has happened in our world with Landon, he's now 18, but for the last, since we started our nonprofit in 2011, we've been out in the community for the last 10 years doing presentations, bringing awareness at different networking events or community events, doing a lot of social media posts telling our story about Landon's diagnosis and just the different things and milestones that we've had to overcome. And in that, we have always run into people that they may have a little one that is starting to show those signs that we speak about. And right away, they're like, what do I do? Like, I think my child has autism now that I heard you speak. Or, we've even had adults themselves come up and say, I think I have autism. What do I do? And so I know you have a lot of knowledge and wherewithal of, why those things might happen or why don't they see it right away? Or, I know a lot of it's education, but there's also where it presents itself at different times. And maybe you can go over those types of things and just kind of share with these families, because I know that once families find out, they actually feel a little relieved at times, because they're like, oh my gosh, I knew something wasn't right, but I just didn't know what. And so maybe you can share a little bit about that and just put some comfort into some of these people's lives that are watching.
Well, the thing about an autism diagnosis, it usually isn't a single test to diagnose it. Instead, it really is a multidisciplinary approach to diagnosis that'll often involve a pediatrician, maybe a psychologist or psychiatrist, maybe even some speech or language pathologists in school. The thing about autism, though, there are three, I guess you could call, core deficits or areas of difficulty in autism, regardless of the age. And those kind of really revolve around impaired communication, impaired social interactions, rather typically reciprocal social interaction, and then restricted and repetitive behaviors and interests. And so we know that we call it a spectrum because people kind of fall in that on that spectrum in various degrees, where some are what we call high functioning, even though that's not a true medical diagnosis. It just simply means somebody who has autism, but they need relatively little assistance in their day-to-day function versus, people who are very, severely impacted. But usually what will happen is if it's not caught early on, in early childhood, which really a lot of the literature focuses on early intervention, early childhood, because we know that's going to give the best outcome, ideally, getting those interventions and therapies and things in place early. But that's such not a new concept, but it's something we're learning more and more about. However, there are lots of older children and teens who currently are struggling with autism and sometimes don't even know it. And I think what happens if it's not picked up early on, like we were talking about, if it's not picked up early on, what happens, I think, into older adulthood, older childhood and teenage years are some of the social pressures, right? We already have an underlying deficit in, communication, social interaction. And so then when we hit a point in our lives where that becomes really important, such as middle school and high school, then we'll really see these things kind of come out because those kids are no longer able to kind of compensate to meet that demand. And so we'll start to see a lot of things like that come out. And usually it's not that they're coming out with autism. They're going to present behaviors. They're going to display a lot of anxiety, maybe even particularly social anxiety. And when you become anxious like that, that can also affect self-confidence. They might start limiting things that they used to really like to do that they now withdraw from. And then, that again plays into self-confidence, can lead to, some depressive type symptoms. And then usually that'll kind of snowball to a point where maybe they're not going to school or struggling. And then that's usually when people are seeking help. And then as we diagnose the anxiety, the depression, then we start to see there's maybe some underlying autism that could be impacting what's going on.
And we've learned, and I've watched it with my friends who have autistic kids. They kind of, I guess they were my my teachers, the people that kind of went through those milestones way ahead of us. And a lot of them, they were like, when the chemicals start changing, especially at puberty, like 9 years old, they say start watching at 9 years old, because sometimes when those chemicals are changing, the behaviors can change as well, and they become somewhat agitated, or their anxiety increases, or their OCD increases, or things start changing, and sometimes can lead to the harm of themselves or others, and people are unaware of that. I just met with a dad the other day, and he was sharing with me, mom passed away last year of cancer, and he's now left to raise 3 boys on his own, and one has autism, and a new girlfriend's coming into his life, and there's just so much change. They haven't even really accepted this death, and now they have somebody new, so there's just a lot of emotion, and he was just concerned. He wanted to make sure he knew everything he needed to know to be the best dad possible to raise this child. And so, one, he learned that he has a lot of support people around him, especially with our organization, because we do have a lot of families that we stick together and we're doing this together. But the other was, I shared with him, when your son starts showing the signs of puberty, be very careful, because it could really lead to a bad situation. And that's why we work a lot with law enforcement as well, because we want them to know, like, if it's untreated because they didn't know, they didn't care, they just didn't know what to do, any of those reasons doesn't really matter, because the crisis is occurring, and it could really lead to a bad situation. And so we're trying to make that awareness to everybody. Well, when I told him that, he said, oh my gosh, my son was taking a bath the other day and he pulled off 2 of his toenails.
Oh
And he
gosh.
goes, I don't know if he doesn't feel the pain. I think he has a high tolerance for pain. I said, Landon did as well. He didn't feel it. He didn't know, like if something was burning him, it would take him a minute for him to feel that because for whatever reason, he just wasn't.
What's
And
that
then,
sensory delay, sensory processing?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, which is very scary, especially when I talk to the firefighters. I always tell them that, like, they may not feel the fire right away. And so they may not smell the smoke, like it may not affect them right away because like you said, there's a delay in that processing, which could be very detrimental to decisions that are being made at that time. And we say they're
Absolutely.
susceptible to situations that are not always good. And so the dad said he's pulling these off and he goes, do you think he's trying to harm himself? And I said, I'm not going to tell you yes or no because I don't know that. I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you that it's definitely something that I would pay attention to. And I would probably encourage him not to do
Mhm.
because it could become that. And now he's cutting, he's scratching, he's doing other things because he needs that rush of whatever it is that he's feeling. And I go, I've met people in this community that do cut and they do self-harm to themselves, scratching and things like that. I go, so, and it's not because they want to, they just don't know how to control it and they've never learned coping skills.
Right. And I think it's important to consider, that type of behavior with cutting or whatever. It's not because, like you said, it's not necessarily that they want to hurt themselves or, try to end things. It's more of a release. I kind of, almost like a tea kettle, right? You have all this anxiety that they're not able to express very well, you know, because of impaired communication.
Yep.
Sometimes what's appropriately socially acceptable, and so when they compile all this anxiety and there's nowhere to express it or not knowing how, it just kind of builds up. And so you have to release that pressure steam somehow. That can be pulling off toenails, that can be cutting, that can be doing other things because that sensory stimulation, one, it kind of almost relieves some of that internal anxiety and pressure. um, Other people, and I don't hear this from some of my autistic patients as much, where they just want to feel so that they know that they're still here, you
Grounded.
know
Yeah.
yeah. And I think you might see some of that as well, but I think a lot of it really does stem from that anxiety and not being able to express it. And so it's just really important at that point to say, okay, well, instead of harming yourself, finding what outlet can work for them and let it and have it be appropriately acceptable within your family, but then allowing them to be able to do that, whatever it is you decide. And that could be different for, everybody based on family dynamics and things like that. But I think just really finding what that outlet can be instead of self-harm.
So Denise, when he was dealing with his kind of his breakdown before that really became like to a boil, we spend a lot of time trying to find natural ways of healing. And we went through a bio and neurofeedback where Landon had to learn how to breathe. And it was like true breaths, like from your diaphragm, just like somebody playing an instrument, like you really had to learn how to breathe through it and be able to hold a breath and do all these things. And I never understood it. So one day I asked his psychologist, I was like, can you explain to me why we're doing this? And he goes, well, let me explain it to you. So he's like, you have this thing in your body called the parasympathetic. And he goes, and it becomes damaged. And it's the thing that naturally calms you or brings your levels, like your anxiety and stress levels to like a plateau, right? And he said, but when you use it over and over and over again, it becomes damaged. And he goes, and so you're almost like resetting it by doing this. And he goes, you have to like repair it. It needs to be healed. And he's like, so I'm teaching Landon how to find ways to calm himself naturally. So I was like, okay, that's great. That, it just wasn't working for us. So we ended up getting Landon into a hospital and he was able to get on meds and, and he's been and working with the psychologist and doing all these things, which was great. But now that he's doing that, sometimes the meds work and sometimes he has his days where they don't. And when that happens, he reverts back to the natural healing methods, changing the picture, looking at something, taking his mind off of something, um, um, you know, sitting down and meditating or breathing, or we do oil and deep pressure, and we just do a bunch of different things. And so we created a coping method list. He has 5 different things, and he added everything from pacing and listening to his music, deep pressure, laying on his back and breathing oils with his eyes closed. But he likes to do that a lot of times, just him and I, or him, Kevin and I, just kind of a family thing, to find ways to naturally heal himself or calm himself. He even added on there, like, take a shower, take a bath, but he also put on there, I said, you could eat chocolate if you want, if that makes you happy. And he started laughing. And even though we added that to the list as kind of a funny thing, sarcastic, it was something that we were going to allow him to do if that was something that would work. Because at that point, we just wanted him to eat. We just wanted him to be healthy and happy, and he wasn't eating anything. So it was like, I would rather have him eat chocolate every day than not eat anything, right? So once we did that, he now, a couple of years later, has learned to self-regulate and implement those things independently. And I feel like that's so necessary, because there's going to be times he's out in the community where these things may happen, and I'm not always going to be there. And so it's eventually something I can't do for him. And I know in my life, I've always wanted to do that. Right. And so I didn't help him. I hurt him. That was just me as mom. But I realize it now, and I encourage families to really, figure it out, hold their hand, kind of like when you taught him how to ride a bike. But then you got to let go of the seat, and you got to let him pedal, and you got to let him ride.
Right. Well, and I think the way you guys did it really is kind of an example of how the natural, well, like a truly integrative approach. We always hear that terminology, and there's some people who are completely holistic, natural, no pharmaceuticals. And then the opposite, right? There's people who are pharmaceutical, natural stuff. There's no proof that it works. But really, sometimes it is about both. There's nothing wrong with doing supplements, oils, these natural alternatives, and use them as coping mechanisms. But medicine does have a place a lot of the times in managing a more acute situation, to then allow the person to develop those coping skills. If you're, and I tell even not just autistic patients, but a lot of my mental health patients where, we know the best outcomes come from combining medication along with counseling or therapies. And, a lot of the times if you seek out counseling, sometimes anxiety, depression, and things like that can be so significant that you can give them their homework list or try to work with them on coping skills. But if they can't complete it, or don't have the motivation to do it, or so anxious they can't even focus on it or think about it, then they're not really able to learn or get that full benefit. But sometimes if we start medication to help manage those things, then now you're able to learn the coping skills. And that's why I think eventually people can come off medicine. One, we know the brain starts to heal itself when those chemicals are in a good balance. But 2, because you've allowed, that's part of that early intervention, right? Because we're trying to catch things before they become an anxiety disorder or a depression, and learn those coping skills to then be able to come off medicine, because now you know how to use them.
I agree with you. And I think that that's exactly what we had to do. The chemicals in Landon's body were changing. He was going through puberty, so it was going fast, and it was happening so fast. He was declining quickly. And it became very apparent that if we didn't do something now, it would become a critical situation. And so we encourage ourselves, as well as families, to do the right thing for the moment to make everyone safe and not at risk. And then once you've overcome that, the quickest way, then you go back and you say, okay, now what can we do as a good game plan long term to be able to support this? But if you're not comfortable with the meds, or you're not comfortable with whatever it may be, that you can slowly integrate to that instead of this, and I think that's, I always share that with families, because I think a lot of times when I hear stories from our law enforcement side of things, those are the things that the families figure out, but after it became a crisis. And
Uh-huh.
it's very scary because, not everybody understands this whole, what we're talking about, and people just don't always get it. And so we just want to make sure that, people are aware, and in that they're not alone. Like, that's a huge piece of this. Is we have a great support group. Sounds of Autism has been around 10 years. We've built lots of relationships with people all over the world. And like yourself, we've met a lot of great people in the community that have the resources that can help support these families. People just don't know about them. So I'm so excited that you were able to come on and share this. And I know that our talks, as we continue this, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for us to discuss a lot of different avenues or areas about autism and at-risk populations that I think will be very beneficial to those watching that don't really have those answers, and they're not really comfortable asking because they don't even know what to ask. And so if you don't mind, Denise, can you tell us, let everybody that's watching know how to get a hold of you and how they can reach out to you to get suggestions as to how maybe you can help support them, or maybe the different resources that you have available to help support our families in our community?
Yeah, absolutely. Our clinic is located in Goodyear. Um, we are off of Litchfield and Indian School Road. We offer medication management, counseling, primary care. We do really treat mind, body health. So we'll look at things from a holistic standpoint as far as, hormones, growth, and but then also be able to address those mental health concerns, behaviors. We have, we'll use supplements and vitamins and nutrition as supportive measures. I've had a lot of families who really want to maximize that before they try medication. Um, and that's something, we always kind of discuss and talk about. And like you're talking about, a child in crisis mode is handled very differently than more of maintenance. It's kind of two schools of thought. So kind of seeing where we are kind of in that, how significant are the symptoms. Sometimes we do have to start medication a little sooner, but sometimes we can kind of give those supplements and um, changing diet and things like that to help, first. But we really do try to treat each person individually. Not every family's cookie cutter, even when you have a similar diagnosis. So we really do try to make it more individualized and what's going to work, for the patient and their family, because it really is a whole family dynamic. It's not, even though you have a child or an adult who may get labeled or diagnosed with this diagnosis, but it really does affect the entire family dynamic and not just that person.
Well, and I agree with that because I know my husband being law enforcement and my son having autism, and then me being the wife and the mom, we all have stresses, different stresses, and the different way we handle them. But when it came down to when we met you, I had just turned 50, and I said, okay, for my birthday present, my fifth birthday present, I think my husband gave me a lot for 50. It was crazy. But I said, Kev, I want you to go with me and let's get healthy. And that's what we did. And that's where we met Denise. She was referred by my sister, who we referred Denise to everybody because she's just been amazing. And Kevin and myself working as a team, we were able to lose weight. We feel better and healthier than we did, at the beginning of all this, which I think it's now been over a year. And now Landon actually joined us, and he's doing this as well. And we're looking at him, and because the meds he takes, they do encourage weight gain, and he's dealing with that. So we have to teach him, but we also want him to understand gut health and brain and all of those kind of things. And he's very committed to being a part of this. He's 18 now, and it's time for him to be ready. And I wish we started it sooner, to be honest. So I really believe that there's a lot of things that we can offer, you can offer, but if you're going to do this, I definitely encourage you to do it as a family, because I think it's the most successful way that you're going to all be able to get the result that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Denise, we're going to meet again. We're going to do this
Sounds
again.
good.
This was a great talk. I'm excited that you were able to meet with us today. I know you're super busy and you got lots going on with family and business. But this is Spectrum Talk, presented and hosted by health and wellness expert Denise Hernandez, nurse practitioner and MBH Wellness Clinic and Sounds of Autism. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Cricket.
You're welcome. Thank you. 1 second here.